Welcome, my friend. I wanted to have you here to talk about because the, the, the whole course of these 3 days is doing business development and kind of getting better clients. And
Mm.
why don't you tell everybody the conversation when you and I met and then how your beliefs changed and specifically what you did put in place to get better clients, money up front, consistent billings.
Okay, so the conversation you and I had happened in July 2018, and it was something along the lines of we had a 2 day um, conference in Slough in the UK, and during the course of the first day, Mike, you told me about the possibility of getting retainers and setting up deposit-based search agreements with clients. And the conversation we had was I shook my head because I remember clearly I was sitting at the front of the room. You complimented me earlier that day for the amount of notes I'd taken, but I was still a doubting Thomas. So I came up to you and I said, but Mike, you don't understand the insurance market and you don't understand the Irish market. They will never, and I quote, they will never pay a deposit for a search. And I remember you just smiled and you laughed. But I took away my doubts and I took away the information. And what I did on foot of those 2 days was I started really quickly implementing some of the ideas you taught us. One of which was to change my script around the interactions I was having with clients. So up to that point, I'd spent 18 years in a form of an abusive relationship with most of my clients, whereby I was non-exclusive, contingency, 100%. And I was pretty much committed to a life of a form of recruitment purgatory with the clients I had indulged for that period of time. But I very quickly recognized, you know what, everything I've done up to this point has not worked. So why not try what you were suggesting? So I just took the information away and I started talking to my clients differently and I started taking engagements differently. I started asking better questions and I slowly started to form the idea that actually I was getting much better interaction from the clients I was dealing with, and they started treating me differently. They started actually treating me with a little bit of respect. And I kind of started respecting myself a little bit more as well. So I remember walking away from the 2 days in Slough, and I remember you saying, no different from what you just said to this group, there are many of you here who will take this information away and you'll do nothing with it and you won't implement. And you'll be stuck in the same place. And there are a couple of you that will take the information away and you will act on it. And I remember thinking distinctly, I don't want to be in the former group. I want to be in the group that actually takes the information and does something with it. And I think within about 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, I'd sold my first ever retainer for €60,000. And I remember distinctly sending you an email going, Mike, I've sold a retainer. So what came off the back of that was the idea then that actually this is possible. And I've kind of spent the last 7 years trying to disprove the theory, but no matter what way I try, my damnedest, I can't actually I can't prove that it's impossible to get retainers because now I've transitioned away from that former abusive relationship of 100% contingency to one where I now enjoy 90% retained or engaged searches with money up front. I don't work for free for anybody anymore. And it was interesting. I was watching one of your slides earlier where you talked about, getting treated differently. I had a conversation in August 2023 with a client whom I walked through my diagnostic. I did a full search and we uncovered some pain points. But he, like me back in 2018, is a bit of a doubting Thomas. He really wasn't ready to commit to the idea of money up front. And we got to the end of the conversation and he said, so, this is what we've historically done. And, this is what I expect our HR team will send you an agreement to sign. And I said, respectfully, I said, there's a disconnect. I'm not going to work that way. I said, there's a disconnect. And he was confused. He didn't understand what I meant by the disconnect. And I said, there's a disconnect between the way you want me to deliver that service to you and the way I professionally deliver my services to other clients. And based on that disconnect, I'm going to respectfully pass. So we agreed to pass, and I walked on and he walked on. I had a call from that client about 4 p.m. this afternoon. 18 months later, he rings me and the house is burning, the house is on fire. He's still trying to hire for the role we talked about in August 2023. And he's consoling himself with the fact that since then, there's been a couple of people that he's spoken with who've taken jobs elsewhere. And he's told himself this story that he has been unfortunate that he got his timing wrong with the market. Now, you remember what the old version of me was like. The old version of me would have just taken that one and let it slide and not said anything. But I challenged him on it. And it goes to your point about respect. Until I started respecting myself and valuing my own time and what I was getting out of this business, I couldn't hope that any of my clients were ever going to respect me. So I challenged the guy and I said, look, with respect, John, you're telling yourself a story that respectfully it just isn't true, because I can prove that in the time that you've taken to procrastinate on hiring for this role, I've placed 3 other people in the exact same role in your market. And he goes, I know, they're competing with me now. And he said, I recognize what they're delivering for those companies. So I suppose, to come back on point, Mike, about what the TRU has taught me, it's taught me to fall in love again with the process. It's taught me to fall in love again with the industry. And it's taught me that if it's possible to sell retainers and be 90% retained or engaged in a market as small as Ireland, it's certainly possible to do it anywhere else.
90%.
90%.
From Mike, you don't understand Ireland.
Yeah.
I remember
And
that email because I was like, it takes guts to send it, because you were it was a very pleasant professional disagreement we had in England when we had that event. But and from a standpoint of, so one, you change your approach, and I love that line, which is word for word the way I've taught it. There's a disconnect in the way you want your services delivered, and we've successfully delivered them to our other clients. And it's a very professional way to pass.
Yeah.
Right. Which leaves the door open when not everyone we talk to that has an opening is going to give us a retainer. It's going to be probably less than half. But those that do it then become repeat clients, multiple hire clients, and that negotiation is over once. From a mindset standpoint, what did you shift? Because you talked about approach and process you shifted. You gave us some ideas. On the mindset side, what had to shift for you to be comfortable being uncomfortable?
Well, the first thing that had to change was my belief system around what was possible in this market. Once I had hard evidence that retainers were possible, then there was a process of, well, okay, what does a really great client look like for me? Because I think I'd been conditioned to thinking that every client was equally as bad as the next one, and that in a non-exclusive contingency environment, you pretty much got what you deserved, which was 1 in 5 fills and wasting your time 80% of the time. So I then changed my mindset around, well, I'm now at a point where I don't waste my time 80% of the time. Actually, I fulfill 90% of the time. There's a legacy component of 10% of contingency clients that are there and that I'll continue to work with. And frankly, it's the easiest money I'll ever make, because they'll never commit to, or at least they're not in a position to commit to, a search. And in some cases, I don't want them to. But I think the mindset piece for me that really shifted was around the belief system and my thoughts about what was possible for me in the business. I really didn't have any clarity going to the first meeting with you in Slough around what I wanted for me or for my life or for the business. I really didn't have any clarity around what I wanted in terms of a great client. I didn't know what a great client looked like. So there's a lot of certainty and clarity that comes with shifting your beliefs around what's possible and shifting your mindset around what you can potentially do with new clients and what you can potentially do with old clients that frankly don't know any better. I firmly believe you used the phrase before, Mike, about becoming a disruptor in the market. And that's kind of the way I look at my role now. I look at myself as a disruptor. It was quite funny in a conversation with that client earlier that I mentioned. he said to me, I know, we spoke back in 2023, and he said, I know you don't want to be considered one of the great unwashed. And I said, what do you mean by the great unwashed? And he said, the recruiters we usually work with. And I was like, okay, so it's interesting. I said, so you view the market from a recruitment perspective as the great unwashed. And I said, what do you regard me as? Well, he said, you're different. And I said, how am I different? Well, he said, you talk differently to me. I said, great. I said, if I can figure out a way to monetize talking differently to people, I said, let me know. And I said, I'll send the invoice. But the point is, with mindset, first of all, you have to have belief. In my case, I had to see to believe. I had to see evidence. And the hard evidence for me was following a process. You used the phrase a recipe earlier. Now, I'd make a terrible chef. I'd be a horrible chef. I'd be a horrible baker. But what I'm really good at is following rules and following a recipe. And I think with the TRU, there's a recipe that encourages you to follow a process that incorporates strategy, that incorporates mindset, and frankly incorporates a lot of the stuff that you talked about on the call earlier, like metrics, for example, tracking metrics. I never tracked metrics before I met you, at least not willingly. And now I've got a process that tells me within a couple of percentage points pretty much how on track I am on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. And I'll give you some hard figures that might be helpful for your listeners. In 2018, up to the point that I met Mike Giunta, I was on track to bill about €20,000. Within 12 months, I 10x my revenue. This quarter, I'm on track to bill I'm on track at the moment to bill €100,000 this quarter. So when I think back to where I was 7 years ago, when I think about the exponential benefit or value that the TRU brought into my life, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. To anybody listening in, if you can get an Irish guy who's a bit of a skeptic, and I'm still a skeptic, but I'm open-minded, a lot more open-minded now than I was. If you can get an Irish skeptic to part with what I consider to be a minimal investment every month to achieve the revenue, exponential revenue that I'm achieving, should be no brainer for anybody else. Because frankly, I consider my market microscopic in comparison to other markets out there.